It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Hello, I'm Lorna Hughes, editor of the Sunday Mail, and I'm joined by the Daily Record's political editor, Paul Hutcheon. This is the second day of our New Look podcast. Yesterday we spoke to our very animated Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader. Today we are joined by the SNP's Chris Stevens. Chris has been an SNP MP since 2015, and he's the candidate in Glasgow South West, one of the key SNP Labour battlegrounds that will determine how this election goes. So let's get cracking. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. How is the campaign and how confident are you feeling?
Well, I think the campaign's still to really burst into life. We've just had the opening exchanges. We've had to obviously spend a bit of time as an office, putting out disillusion letters, just explaining to constituents what happens, what we can and can't do in terms of any ongoing cases. Having to explain to people that they've moved constituency. So we have a situation where half of the Cardona ward is moving to Paisley and Enfreyshire North, and a lot of people have questions around that. And obviously, I take on a lot of the Pollock Shields ward. But I'm feeling good. We've got a cracking team of activists. We're one of the top teams in terms of getting voter identification. So I think it's very much all to play for. And we'll be chasing the last vote down.
Chris, you might be aware there was another opinion poll this morning, this time by Savanta, and it was very much on trend with previous polls over the last few weeks. It shows a narrow Scottish Labour lead. And I think that the polling guru, John Curtis, did his own extrapolation of seats. And I think that he said that if it was replicated on polling day, then Labour would come out with around 28. And I think, just looking at my notebook, the SNP on 18. What's your reaction to this poll? And are you worried about it?
I'm not worried about the polls. When I do look at polls, because I'm a political geek like yourself, Paul, the first figure I always look at is the undecideds, and I think the undecideds have been very high in Scottish polls. So I haven't seen the Savanta data tables yet, but there was one that was fairly similar from More in Common, which showed 19% of people who are going to vote are saying at this moment in time they do not know. And I'm seeing some of that in our campaigning yet, that people have still to decide. So I think that once the campaign bursts into life, as I think it will, I think you'll start to see the undecideds moving, and that may have an effect. And of course, I'm going to give you the standard political answer is there's only one poll that matters, and that's the outcome on the 4th of July.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Chris, is Glasgow the battleground? Do you think that is the city of Glasgow where the general election will be won and lost in Scotland?
Well, I think Glasgow's the centre of the universe. I'm always going to say that. But what I would say is that I think there's possibly different things happening in different parts of Scotland. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that we have a lot of constituencies which are very competitive. They are new constituencies as well, because I think most of the Scottish constituencies have had some changes. So certainly my concentration is in Glasgow South West and seeing an SNP win. But I do think that there are different things happening. I do get the sense that people in towns and villages maybe have different views than people in urban centres on some issues, and I wonder how that will play come the general election.
Chris, I mean, the SNP have run riot in Scottish politics for nearly a decade now, over a decade. So if you look at the Westminster election 2015, that was the breakthrough election where you nearly wiped out Labour. 2017 wasn't so good, but you still won it. 2019 was another resounding win for your party. But it's clear from the polls that something is shifting, that Labour are back, that they're in line to make significant gains from the SNP. Why do you think there has been this shift over the last 6 months or so?
Well, I actually think it was longer than that. So I think the first shift that you saw in the Scottish polling was immediately after Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget. And I think you saw at that point, you saw Tory voters going to Labour. I think that since then, there has been a trend where people are giving Labour in Scotland a second look. Some people like that look, some people don't like that look, and that's certainly my experience in the doors. But I do think in this election, in terms of any polling shifts I'm going to see, is those undecideds, which I think are quite high in the polls. What way they break, I think, will determine the election. And that's why I'll be chasing every last vote and chasing the last vote down.
I mean, I think that when it comes to elections, I'll let Lorna in just a wee second, but it's whoever frames the election successfully always seems to do well on polling day. I mean, how do you think, from an SNP perspective, the election in Scotland should be framed?
Should be framed, obviously, on independence, but the real issue in the doors is the cost of living. Everybody's bills are going up. They see these companies posting record profits and they think that something's got to give. And I think that whoever frames a message around the cost of living, eliminating poverty, improving people and improving rights in the workplace, and having a position of where Scotland is in the world, I think that the political party who successfully frames that is the party that's going to have the most success in the 4th of July.
I was going to interrupt, and when you mentioned about the undecideds and also why you think the ratings have shifted, the undecideds, what are they telling you on the door? I mean, you're right, they'll tell you about the cost of living, they'll tell you that they've got higher heating bills, they will be getting, absolutely, certainly outraged by what's going on down in Westminster. But are they not also telling you that they have problems with the SNP now?
Some are. Some are using some of those as a reinforcer. It reinforces why they're undecided, or it reinforces why they're staying, not voting for us. I think that is clear. But I do get the sense there's just an anti-politics feel as well. And I think that you started seeing that over the last couple of years. I think there's definitely just an anti-politics feel, not trusting people. And I think that we have to do something about that. And I think that all of us in political parties have to regain trust, because I'm seeing just as many Labour undecideds as I'm seeing SNP undecideds. I'm seeing Tory voters switching to Reform. I'm seeing some Tory voters switching to Labour. So it's all to play for, but it's the doorsteps that's going to. It's also the political party that's engaging in the doorsteps more that's going to impact in this election.
I mean, unless you've got voters who, have been living underground for the last 12 months or so, Operation Branch Form's been in the papers a lot. The Michael Matheson expenses scandal, that's not done the SNP any favours. Are these two issues coming up on the doorsteps, or are ordinary punters raising them with you in Glasgow South West?
They are, but I think they're more reinforcing opinion and reinforcing their thoughts rather than the outcome of their thoughts. And certainly I think it's one of the reasons why there's a good number of undecideds out there.
And what are you saying to them, Chris, when they're asking, because you talked about trust there. I think you're right. Trust in politics is perhaps a bit broken. And, the SNP definitely, actually rode that wave on being, more trustworthy. And when we're seeing things like Michael Matheson and everything around that, you've got to being asked questions about this. And how do you answer that?
Well, I mean, I have to talk about myself because it's my name, it's on the ballot paper. So I talk about having one of the largest number of surgeries of any MP, so that I'm accessible, that have, an accessible office. My track record in standing up for people in Glasgow South West, the positive media I've had around, for example, some of the campaigns which the Daily Record has covered, for example, on universal credit deductions, the work I've done locally in building a community shop network in terms of helping people with the cost of living. So I have to sell myself in the doorsteps, and so do my activists, and I think that I have a good track record there locally. and a good profile in terms of being a significant left-wing Member of Parliament and how that can help people. And I've also achieved things as well. You will remember, Lorna, this ridiculous situation in which benefit claimants, if they hadn't been paid in time or sanctioned, were phoning the Department of Work and Pensions, and it was costing them 55 pence a minute to get through to somebody. And for some people, that was £9 they were having to spend phoning the DWP. It was my campaign that eliminated that. It was my campaign that made sure, for example, that we're now paying, the state's now paying bereavement support payments for those who were in cohabiting couples, because that was a complete and utter ridiculous situation that was taking place. And of course, I've done some work where we've made some impact and set up a compensation authority and infected bloods. One of the first constituency cases that I dealt with was someone who had been caught up and a family who had been caught up in that particular scandal. So I'm selling my record as a local Member of Parliament seeking re-election. There are some things I can control and there's some things I can't control. There's some things I can't talk about because obviously I would then be in a position where I would be caught up with something. So I'm talking about myself, my records, and the record of the Westminster Group. Plus, there are some good things happening in Scotland. The child payment, for example, I think is having a real effect on people's lives. And that's also coming up in the doors that people will mention to you how much that's helping them. I do think that we have to talk about the good things that we've done, both Holyrood and Westminster, and what our programme is. Paul mentioned the 2017 election. I won by 60 votes in 2017 because there was a huge, I was probably one of the first people to see that there was a Corbyn bounce in Scotland at that particular time, because people were attracted at that message. I think that we also have to look forward as well as to what we want to see, what the society in Scotland that we want to see.
Chris, you're a socialist. You're on the left of the SNP group, or rather the group that used to exist because you're no longer an MP. From a socialist perspective, what did you make of the disintegration of the partnership with the Greens? Were you glad to see the back of it, or were you disappointed?
Well, I was one of the 5% who didn't vote for it. Excuse me. And the reason I didn't vote for it is because I thought that a confidence supply arrangement would be better. And I thought that with the numbers that could work. I also think it was coming to a natural end because I was speaking to Green Party activists who were not happy with the relationship. It was quite clear there were SNP members who weren't happy with the relationship. And I'm afraid when you've got two sides not happy with a relationship, then the relationship has to end. So I think it came to a natural point when it had to end. So I wouldn't say I was happy or sad, but I did feel that it was naturally coming to an end anyway, and it was probably best to end when it did.
Before we move on to the benefit system, I think you can help us as a Partick Thistle fan with one of the enduring mysteries of the Michael Matheson affair. So just bear with me. So if you remember that the whole controversy was about him and the family holiday in Morocco, and the data roaming bill coincided with an Old Firm match. And I think it was put to us that Michael is a big Thistle fan. I'm not saying I'm sceptical of that, but there was a bit of scepticism in some quarters. You're a Thistle fan. Have you ever seen Michael Matheson at Firhill?
I have seen Michael Matheson at the Theatre of Dreams, Paul. You're Paul, I have known you for 15 years. And, to suggest that you may be cynical, I think is an understatement. Yes, I have seen Michael Matheson at the Theatre of Dreams, which is, of course, Firhill Stadium, on many occasions, along with some of his family members.
Well, there we go. As I was saying, I wasn't sceptical for a second that he's a Partick Thistle fan. Of course he always was, and you've confirmed it for us. Thanks very much. That's very good of you. Just on benefits, Chris, I mean, you've worked on a lot of stories with the Record and the Sunday Mail on the DWP and some of their callous practices and policies. Just a double header of a question. Do you think Labour are going to win this election? And if they do, are you hopeful about a change of direction in terms of social security?
I think it's likely. That Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister. can never be absolutely sure because but the first general election I was ever politically active in was in 1992, and everybody thought the Tories would be gone then. So I've always been sceptical that there is a large number of silent Tories in England who would never admit to anybody in polite company that they vote Conservative. So I think it's likely. Whether it's a majority or not, I think it's still up in the air. It could be a minority. I'm not terribly confident that there'll be changes, because what I've seen so far in some of the announcements of Labour is that they're not going to, I think, change universal credit radically enough. As you'll know, Paul, with the work and the Daily Record's position is very much mine, is that when someone starts a universal credit claim, they should get a starter payment at that point, and then the payment should then continue. What's happening, of course, as the Daily Record readers will know, we have this ridiculous situation where they pay out in advance, and then people who are on universal credit have deductions from those regular payments on average of £60 a month. And why is that's important? Because the deduction system actually then reduces what the state has decided is the minimum amount someone can live on. So I would hope the next government seriously looks at this. The other concern I have, where I've not really seen Labour talk about, is this situation that Rishi Sunak was talking about, is that the DWP can then start snooping into people's bank accounts and what they're actually spending money on. I think completely and utterly ludicrous situation. So I'm not all that confident, but it would certainly be my job, if I'm given the privilege of being re-elected, to push these issues again, because I think they are really important and they are having a detrimental impact in people's lives, not just in Glasgow South West or Scotland, but across the UK.
And how about the 2-child cap, Chris? I mean, clearly there's been criticism of Labour for not committing to get rid of it. My suspicion, or rather my insight, is that they'll have this review of universal credit when they get in, and they'll use that as a device or a vehicle to scrap the 2-child cap. Is that how you see it, or are you a bit more downbeat about it?
Well, I'm probably more cynical than you, Paul, which I know takes some doing, and sceptical around that, because I don't see that. It should go, it has to go. Every single piece of academic research, every paper that's looked at the effects of the 2-child cap is showing that it is putting families into poverty. And, you know, a review can take as long as it takes, unfortunately. So I think it should be one of the top priorities, because we need to start moving people out of poverty. You see the sense of people in poverty, what it then means for the rest of their lives. I touched on infected blood, for example. A lot of people impacted by that were then put in poverty. They lost their jobs. They missed out on all sorts of life's opportunities. We need to eradicate poverty, and I would like to see, I think, everyone talk about that together and how we can do that. And the 2-child cap really needs to go as soon as possible.
No, I think everybody would agree with you on that, Chris. Absolutely. I think a lot of people would also say that, you know, you have been in power up here for quite a long time, and you could have done more. In terms of obviously challenging, if Labour do win, I presume you'll be bringing all of that up and holding their feet to the fire on that.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see also, which goes back to Paul's question, of building a social security system in which the Social Trust is saying it has to be an essentials guarantee, is that we should set it at a minimum where people can buy essentials, because it's quite clear at the moment that's not the case. There are people who are using food aid provision and having to use food aid provision because of how poor the social security system is. I would also say, in terms of Glasgow, how poor the immigration system is as well. We're asking those who are seeking sanctuary in the UK to live on £45 a week. Now, to put that into perspective, that was roughly what I was getting when I was a youth trainee for Strathclyde Regional Council in 1990, and we're expecting people to live on that. I just think it's scandalous.
And listen, I've got to ask you this, Chris, just because obviously you're justice spokesman, so you might have a slight interest, but Trump, obviously the news late last night that he's been convicted of 34 felonies. Do you think this is the end of populist politics, or God forbid, do you think it's just going to get worse? And will it get even over here?
Well, I hope it's the end of right-wing populism. I think that what Trump has done, not just in America, but you do see it here, is that the sort of views that he espouses, I think, pollutes political debate. You see it in social media, for example. I mean, since Musk took over Twitter is a bin fire. I've found myself blocking so many folk that I'd never ever done. I very rarely had to block people. I'm now having to do it on a regular basis because all these bots are getting created. There are people who are spreading so many views. Because remember, the first thing that Musk did was he paid off all the people who checked things on Twitter to make sure that there was no abuse, there was no threats, there was none of that. That was the first thing Elon Musk did. So I think that what Trump has done is pollute political discourse. And I think that's a great pity. I obviously want to see Biden win in America, and I hope he does win. But I do think that we need to spend a bit more time taking on some of this right-wing populism and pointing at people and blaming them for things that government do.
I mean, despite the fact he led that insurrection, despite the fact that he's a racist, despite the fact he's the most divisive politician of our generation, he's still ahead in the polls. I mean, how do you think that the US election is going to go? Do you think Biden will win, or do you think Trump will win?
Well, I hope Biden wins. I think that if Trump wins, I think that we have major problems in the world. And I do worry about political discourse. So I hope that what's happened last night is the start of the end of right-wing populism.
Yeah, I think Trump will win though, Chris. I think it's...
Yeah, but it'll be interesting now because I was trying to follow it last night as to he's now got 34 convictions, but it doesn't look as if that dispars him from seeking office, which for one of the most powerful positions in the world, I think is a bit strange to me that someone who has 34 felonies. But we'll need to see how it plays out. But again, it comes back down to what we're going to face on the 4th of July. It's not over till it's over, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. But I certainly hope to see Biden victorious and back in again.
I think what's even more shocking is you can be convicted of 34 felonies and it's not a jail sentence. You know, the most to get is probably community service. So we could only hope that he's picking up litter around Central Park, which might be quite nice to see.
No. I would want more than that. I think he'd say.
Yeah, but I don't think he's a first offender. Sadly, I don't think that's going to happen.
I think that's probably right. I think the other situation about it is that it's basically his mentality that can pay people off. Excuse me, he can pay people off, and he's untouchable. And his reaction to the charges last night was, completely and utterly out there, and that he's been found by 12 peers in America to say you are guilty of all these things, Donald, and his first thing is to lash out. I mean,
he's just a guy who just refuses to take responsibility for any of his actions. That's the sort of defining trait of his personality.
He's probably a spoiled brat as a Wayne. You could just picture him, couldn't you? It's just,
Wasn't his mother Scottish? This is worrying.
It may have been, but probably.
It's just people like him, or rather politicians like him, right and left and across. It is spreading, and that's why we have voter apathy. That's why we have mistrust in politics. I don't think you can underestimate that at all. And there's absolutely no doubt when people do not take account of or take actual, resign or at least accept when they've done something wrong. The punters see that. And
And I think that's why it's important that I set out one of my earlier answers, is that when you're standing for office, I have always tried to explain to people, well, this is the sort of member of parliament I want to be. Have an accessible office, because some MPs don't. Some MPs have offices where they can't reach, or people don't know where they reach. Have a large number of surgeries where people can come to you and talk about your concerns, because they shouldn't always have to come to us. We should be going to them. What we would do in providing that basic service, I think it starts from that, and I think that what we all have to do is sell and promote what kinds of MPs we're trying to be, whether it be constituency focused, and I would argue I have been constituency focused because of some of the local work that I've done around trying to deal with food poverty, for example. And I think we're doing magnificent work on that. We have to start as people who are seeking office, or who've come into politics or politically active, to do that. And that's what I'm hoping to do between now and the 4th of July.
You mentioned that you're an MP who goes and speaks to the voters, and obviously you're chapping doors now in the election campaign. I saw that sort of gaffe, or maybe it was an intentional gaffe by Ed Davey, the Lib Dem who fell off the paddleboard into the water. What's your most embarrassing moment during an election campaign when you've been on the doorsteps?
Oh, that's a magnificent question, Paul. I think that if I ever get to publish my memoirs, I should probably have a chapter on this. We've been out the door since October, since I was reselected. But I think we've had, over the years, we've had some cracking stories. So I remember there was a council by-election in Govan in 2013, and I was checking the canvas sheets afterwards, and one colleague had written, beside this particular name, half-naked man with clips on his nipples, which was, a sight that immediately goes into your head as to what that could possibly look like. And down incidentally is undecided, so make of that what you will. So I think that one of the great things about this, about political campaigning, is that it's a lottery. It's a complete and utter lottery. Never make any assumptions whatsoever when you're given a name on a door. So that's one of them.
Do you ever get people who are extremely rude?
Very occasionally. I think the electorate, on the whole, are fair-minded. Some will tell you, sorry, not for you. You get that very, very occasionally. I've had to, unfortunately in this job, I've had to report some individuals to the police. And I think it's a great shame I've had to do that. But I'll do that not just for my protection, but for the protection of the constituency office staff, because they're important as well. You have to remember, Paul, in the time that I've been elected, 2 of my parliamentary colleagues have been murdered. And so I take that part of it seriously, because 1, you're an employer, and 2, you have to consider yourself. But I think on the whole, the voters are fair-minded, and they will listen to the arguments, and they'll listen to the debate.
You just have to watch now. I can only imagine with people with video cameras, obviously on their phones, that you could find yourself on YouTube if you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, some people have done that, unfortunately, but that is something that I would talk to the police about, or if I've been an MP and people have tried that, I've spoken to parliamentary security around those sorts of issues. But on the whole, Lorna, I think that people are fair-minded, and they will engage with you, and they'll listen to you, and we listen to them. And I think that's a good thing, society. I think we need to promote that more. But I think that I have to take a very uncompromising attitude to people who don't conduct themselves that way, and it's something I'll always continue to do. And I would encourage any candidate or any elected representative, no matter what party they're in, to do the same.
I've got 2 final questions before we wrap up. Would you be happy for Nicola Sturgeon to campaign alongside you on the stump?
Well, Nicola's very popular in Glasgow South West. She is the MSP for some of the area, so I think that Nicola is, and she still has support locally. I haven't thought about that, to be quite honest with you. So Nicola would certainly not be turned away. And there's a lot of people in the south side of Glasgow who still like her, Paul.
And finally, would you be happy for Michael Matheson to campaign alongside you?
Well, I'm sure Michael will be on the streets of Falkirk like everybody else. I certainly expect that with the number of activists I have and with the voter ID that I have, that I probably won't get as many of the big names as other people, but I know that I'm hoping that John Swinney will be out, because we've got a number of food projects which are going to be launched in the next couple of weeks, and some big launches of community shops, which are a vital part of what we're trying to do to eradicate poverty here in the Glasgow South West and beyond.
That sounds like the next time you want to see Michael's back at Firhill rather than your own constituency.
Well, everybody's always... Paul, even you're welcome at the Theatre of Dreams, I'm sure, and perhaps next season, when we get promoted and Aberdeen are there, I'm sure we'll wave to each other and exchange pleasure.
I'll have my binoculars out looking for you in Matheson. Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned binoculars, because one of the best stories I think I have of football is that someone told me they knew that England football was becoming a middle class sport in England when they went to a Chelsea game and saw a guy coming out with the opera glasses. So maybe you can bring your opera glasses to a future football game.
Oh, Chris, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. That's really good of you. And just to say, that's us done. But this will be available for everybody to see in the usual places, including the Daily Record YouTube channel. Thank you very much, Chris, and good luck next few weeks.
Thanks very much indeed.
Bye. Bye.
It's important we look at the facts.
Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.